if you can get out of the way of those people so that they're operating at the very top of their potential, that's how you're going to win. I don't really care where we're going, but I care a whole lot about how we get there and about who we're going down that road with. And if we do those two things right, well, who cares where we end up? We'll end up in a good place.
If you could say one thing directly to leaders who are facing these mental health workforce challenges, what would it be? Welcome to the Human Side of Construction podcast, where we provide construction leaders with the insights they need to improve the industry and the great people in it. I'm Angelo, and I'm joined here today by Geoff Smith, a very special guest, someone who I admire and respect immensely, and who needs no introduction. Geoff, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
So I had the pleasure of working under Geoff's leadership, for 4 years when I was at EllisDon, battling it out of Michael Guerin Hospital.
It's a tough job.
They're all tough jobs.
Right.
So I was in charge of mechanical, electrical, ICAT installation and commissioning, all the fun stuff. And I witnessed firsthand what people-first leadership can really do for a company and extend that to the industry as well. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. We're going to touch on some different topics: leadership, workforce development, culture. And we're going to spend some time zooming in on something we're both passionate about, and extremely important: mental health and psychological safety, not only on sites, but in the office as well. And more importantly, what EllisDon is doing to kind of combat these things. So you ready to go?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Rock and roll. Before we jump in head first here, I know about 3 years ago, you transitioned into a different type of role at EllisDon. Can you share kind of what you're working on these days, or is it confidential or top secret or anything?
It's very top secret, but for you, I'll just let you in on it, but mum's the word, all right?
Sounds good.
I stepped down as CEO June 2.5 years ago, but I didn't take my finger entirely out of the pie. I have a passionate interest, and I believe at a very serious level that digital and artificial intelligence is not going to just change our company or individual companies, but it's going to remake our entire industry. So I've kept a role there. But other than that, I've turned over all the leadership at EllisDon to Kieran Ha, who's the CEO and the current management team. I'm doing some community things, trying to help out where I can, and that's about it.
Okay, awesome. So I first worked with Kieran actually probably longer ago than I like to admit, but Kremble Discovery Center, it was a joint venture.
Oh, yeah, that's a while ago.
He was project director.
Yeah.
And he's been a great guy to work with. So let's rewind to the beginning here. So you're a lawyer by training. Okay. You kind of found yourself into the family business, whether you wanted to or not, I don't know. But you ended up leading the company for almost 30 years. And you took it from where it was to, I don't know how many billions of dollars you guys are doing now. And what impressed me the most about your leadership style was, you accomplished a lot, but it was the humility. Right? You never took credit. You were always quick to shine the spotlight on other people. And that's really interesting. You openly admit that you're not a builder. That's not your expertise. You
That's
just
right.
know people who are.
I can't build a card house.
So in an industry like construction, where can be unacceptable to show vulnerability, express weakness, and admit that you don't know, how did you come to the realization that that wasn't actually a weakness, but rather like a huge advantage?
Well, let's ask first how I came to the realization that that's what I had to do, rather than whether it was an advantage or not. My first leadership was as being as area manager in our Western Canadian operations. I was 29 years old. Long story there, but in any event, there I was. And I didn't know anything about construction. I've got all these people around me who do, and some very great people, and frankly, some not so great people. And so I didn't have any choice. If I wasn't nice to these people, if I wasn't asking them for their advice, given that I didn't know what to do, I would have failed miserably. My leadership style at the very beginning was to try and figure out who among that fairly large group of construction people we had knew what they were doing, and to be very nice to them. And to not only make them feel needed, which they were, but welcome and at home, to make them feel like this is where they wanted to be, so that they would stay. So it was pure necessity on my part at the beginning.
Okay, no, interesting. So when you talk about culture, like you mentioned, making people feel like they want to stay. Like, to me, that's what culture is, and it's hard to really put your finger on, right?
That's right. So construction, I can't speak about any other business, Angel. I've been in this business. I was only a lawyer for like 6 months, And I realized that wasn't for me. I was going to be better in business. So I got into this business, and it's the only business I've ever known. In construction, you've just got the people who are doing the building in your company, and the people who are supporting them. You don't have anything else. You don't have any intellectual property. You don't have any equipment, really. You got some, very little. So you've got those people. And if you can get those people, or better yet, if you can get out of the way of those people so that they're operating at the very top of their potential and reaching for more potential, well, that's how you're going to win, I think. And if people understand, because that was my experience, I guess, that they don't know how far they can go. But let's go on this road together, and we'll figure out how far you want to go, how far you can go. Let's go. Let's just see what happens. Let's not worry about it. Then you end up with people who really want to stay, who are having fun, and you end off on an adventure because you don't really know where you're going.
So would you say that's the plan, is to just kind of be there with them and help them find their way? Or because a lot of organizations, the ones I've worked in and other leaders I talk to, it's almost like it's management heavy. This is the plan. This is how you do it. This is the process. And I don't think a lot of people like that. There's some people that like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I think largely, one of the basic needs of a human is a little bit of autonomy, some freedom, and the ability to see how their actions are part of the bigger picture, right? How they fit into the grander scheme of things, something bigger than themselves.
So a lot of people before me, there's something I'm sure you've heard of that everybody's probably heard of called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the very top of that is he uses fancier terms. The term I use is self-worth, a feeling of pride in yourself, a feeling that what you do matters. Once you're earning enough money to feed your family, once you've got clothes in your back, then you start thinking, okay, what can I do that really engages me? If you come up with a culture, and a culture is nothing more than an environment that fosters and encourages that. And I'm not saying we succeeded every day. I'm not saying I'm particularly great at that. But if you strive to do that, and you can make sure people know that that's the whole idea here behind EllisDon, not necessarily to build that building on time and on budget, but to make you successful in your career. And then you don't need to worry, they'll build the building on time and on budget, because personal accountability is a big one of our values. But you're accountable to each other. So if you give people that feeling, then you attract the best people. Just what you just said. That's what people want. Well, if you give it to them, the best people will come, and the best people will stay. And the people who say, just as you said, just tell me what you want me to do and I'll go do it, well, they leave, because those people aren't going to take the company anywhere. So that was the idea, and is the idea.
I think when we talk about culture and building a strong culture, I don't think any leader would say that they don't want a strong culture. Everybody's obviously going to say they do. But people I've talked to don't necessarily have a plan. When they say, yeah, we have a strong culture here, well, what does that actually mean? So when you talk about culture, EllisDon, building a place where people want to stay, empowering employees to achieve their full potential, like what does that mean to you? Break that down.
What you have to do first is define the culture so that it's clear and people can hopefully repeat it. So our culture, which we've stated very clearly that the purpose of EllisDon is to help people have great careers, and to help them help others have great careers. Our purpose is nothing more glorified or more technical than that. And then you have to break, well, what does that mean? Well, here's what it means. It means 4 or 5 things. It means we trust you. It means we'll give you all the tools and all the information. We call it complete openness. We tell everybody everything about the company. But then we say, listen, if we trust you, and if we give you everything we possibly can, then you've got to be accountable. You don't have to rewrite all the time. You don't have to be accountable to your boss, although you do. We all have a boss. But be accountable to the person beside you. Then you'll be just fine. We want you to be entrepreneurial, which means we want you to think. We want to use your brain, not have you following some process. So anyway, in terms of our culture, you set out, here's the goal, or here's the purpose of the company. Here are the key elements of that culture. And then the thing is, for us anyway, we just had to drive it and drive it and drive it. We had to repeat it. It took me at least, I thought, well, I'll go announce this is like 25 years ago. I'll go say to everybody what this new culture is that we're trying to instill. And after I make one brilliant speech, they'll get it. Yeah, well, guess what? They don't get it because they weren't listening and they weren't buying it when you said it anyway. But if you just keep at it and you write it down and you put it everywhere, including on your website, including on the walls, including in the foyer when they come in, and you make it clear to people that if you're on side with this culture, just great. We want you to stay. But if you're offside with this culture, you should go because we're going to ask you to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had people who've made great money for EllisDon on our projects. Not very many, but a couple. And we've said, dude, you got to go because you're a jerk. You're just not a nice person. So you got to go. So when people see that, when they say, well, there's a guy that was making a lot of money or was, by a lot of normal standards, very successful, who just got fired, they go, I guess these values matter. I better pay attention. So we call them moments of truth. Something happens that's against the culture. You stop everything right there and say, no, until we fix it. So that's how you do it. And it's a never ending battle. We say strategy changes. We say the business model may change. Digital may disrupt everything. The values never change.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to come from the top. And I know that Kieran Ha, who's now the CEO, has this right in his heart and in his stomach and in his brain. He's got it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I know it won't be compromised.
Yeah. Well, it's important for sure to have it from the top down. I've seen different mission statements, vision statements, core values, but it's really, if you don't demonstrate them day in, day out, and the people in place to reflect that, it's meaningless, right? Because people will detect a misalignment. They'll be like, yeah, the wall says that, but John's acting this way, and it creates a bit of friction.
So I'll just add one thing. At EllisDon, if you look around, people come, including directors, boards, people on our board. They say, well, where's your mission statement? Well, we don't have one. Well, where's your vision statement? No, we don't have one of those either. Well, why not? Well, the reason is, when I was the leader anyway, I can never figure out exactly where we're going because our mission is to do this or our mission is to go there. Well, the world changes too fast.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday we were going there, but today we may be going somewhere else. We're going to be entrepreneurial. I could never find one that worked. They're either way too narrow so that they were limiting or they were too broad, in which case they were meaningless. But so we don't know where we're going. And what we say is, what I used to say all the time is, I don't really care where we're going, but I care a whole lot, uncompromisingly so, about how we get there and about who we're going down that road with. And if we do those two things right, well, who cares where we end up? We'll end up at a good place.
Right.
That's it.
More about the journey, not the destination.
I know it's been said a million times, but it happens to be true. When you get to the end of your career, I'm at the end of my career. Trust me on this. I don't think about the things I did or the buildings we built. I think a whole lot about the memories of the people that I spent my career with.
Mm-hmm. And well, I'm sure you've impacted many lives in a positive and maybe not so positive way. I don't know.
Well, I probably impacted a few lives, but maybe we won't go there, right? Who knows?
That's what business is. You got to make the tough decisions to make the best.
You're not doing anybody any favors.
Yeah.
If you don't make the tough decision. No. If they're not their view, then they're not happy. You're not happy. Nobody's happy. So you have to make those tough decisions. You're probably doing everybody a favor.
So two things came to mind as you were talking there. Number one, I heard a quote on culture, and I'm not going to do it any justice, but it's the minimum standard you accept on how your employees treat each other, right? So you're talking about setting the bar, not really a high bar. This is what we expect you to do. It's almost like this is what we expect you not to do. Maybe that's a little clearer for people to understand.
Well, maybe, but I don't agree with that. But what's your second point? Then we'll come back to the first one.
The second point. So I've worked at different size companies, right? EllisDon, obviously, a few thousand people. I've worked in mom and pop shops as well, and other big companies. And I've found in other people I've talked to, it's like a company reaches a certain point and then it becomes a corporation, right? Where it's run by maybe lawyers and accountants, and the decisions are made by more than what's on a spreadsheet than what might be the best for the people. What are your thoughts on that? Because it sounds like EllisDon does not operate like that. It's always been people first. So how do you maintain that entrepreneurial spirit and that agility?
So let's go back to the first question for a minute. I think we expect everybody to embrace our culture. We frankly try and hire people who bring that culture and that mindset, that philosophy of life with them. But I don't think it's a low bar. You do have to embrace it. But I think really spending your life following the principles of our culture is a challenge, and we want it to be a challenge. We want it to be good. So I wouldn't call it a low bar, but yeah, we do want people to be following it. Secondly, around growth, what you said is really important. And when the company was growing, I'd get people coming up to me and saying, Geoff, when the company was smaller, everybody knew everybody, and it was so good, and it was just so much like home, and we were like a family. And now the company's so big, and there's so many processes. And I'm going, well, I'm doing my best here. And now the company's 3 times as big as it was then, and I'm sure people have the same things. The balance between process and the human side, and the people side, and the culture is one that you never stop fighting to achieve. There will always be policies, there will always be processes, but every company has a culture, whether they know it or not. If the leaders don't think about it, then they end up with one that's bureaucracy and nobody cares, and it's the bottom line, and that's all you exist for. But you have a culture, so if you're a leader, really you should be thinking about what you want it to be and what you want your employees to live, and want them to know why they stay at the company. Now, let me just give you Siemens. There's a global company. They have a culture. And I think a pretty positive culture, but they've got one. So you'll have a culture even though your company is monstrous.
Right. I guess the takeaway there is, even if you don't think you have one, your employees might dictate it then in the way they operate.
Well, no, with all due respect, the leaders will dictate it, but if you don't think about it, then it ends up just being about profits and quarterly results, and it will end up being about the process because the leaders didn't provide any other kind of culture.
Let's shift gears here for a little bit and touch on the mental health side of things.
Let's do that.
If that's okay, we'll jump into it. So, it's a tough topic to talk about. I've delved into it. I've had, personal friends and people close to me who have been impacted negatively by it.
We all have.
And I've been through my own stuff as well. And I don't use this term lightly, but we're in the middle of a mental health epidemic.
Of course we are.
Globally, yes, but we're here to talk about specifically in construction, which, it's almost like there's been a magnifying lens on the industry. So I'm just going to read some stats here just to kind of frame the conversation, put it into context. So in construction, you're 6 times more likely to die by suicide than all other workplace fatalities combined. So falling from heights, electrocution, struck by a confined space, add all those together, 6 times more people die by suicide. It's 4 times the national average when compared to other industries. I found a recent study from 2025, the Chartered Institute of Building. It reported that 94% of construction workers experienced stress in the past year, 83% experienced anxiety, 60% experienced depression. What's most alarming about that report, I found over a quarter, so 26% of people surveyed, reported having suicidal thoughts in the past year. Stigma has been traditionally a big barrier into seeking help or expressing vulnerability. Another study showed 45% of construction workers say they're ashamed to talk about mental health issues at work, and 35% were discriminated against for speaking up about these issues. We talked before we started filming about substance misuse, which is a huge issue in construction. So on that, the recent study showed construction workers are 7 times more likely to die of an opioid overdose than workers in other industries. Construction workers represent about a quarter of all opioid overdoses among workers. And in 2022, over 17 times as many construction workers died from overdoses than job site fatalities. That was a lot of information. So maybe we'll give it a second to sink in. But, as you're hearing these and going through them, I know you're familiar with a lot of that. Like, what comes to mind when you hear these things?
It's a disaster. It can't, I don't know how else to describe it. And I have to say, I went through most of my career, and I've been in the business about more than 4 decades, without being aware of those statistics. I remember back when I was in Calgary, we had a big downtown job site called Bankers Hall, and the police came visit one day, and they said there's a lot of drug use going on our job site. They wanted our help, and I was stunned to hear that. And but even then, I had no idea of the numbers that you just quoted there, really, until the last, I'm going to say less than 10 years, the last 25% of my career. And so you hear it and you go, well, I don't understand it. I didn't see it. Frankly, I didn't feel it. Although we've all had struggles with our mental health, with our emotions, with depression, I certainly have.
Mm.
But you think that's an internal struggle. You don't think that anybody else is struggling. So then when you hear that they're not just struggling, they're suicidal and they're using drugs and the incidence of injury, whether self-inflicted or otherwise, is so much greater. You go, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Because the problem, you just stated it, it's huge. And as everybody knows, I think, COVID made it that much worse. The only benefit, I'm going to say this carefully, when I've said anyone, of the COVID impact was that we also became more aware. And we started to take more action and invest more money, resources about battling it. So I guess that's the only good thing to come out of it, because it's a fight every day and it takes resources, it takes time, and it takes compassion, it takes all those things. But the numbers are staggering.
That was the biggest eye opener for me when I got into this stuff. And I remember a staff from KMH, actually, not specific to construction, but I think they said in Canada, by the time you're 40, 50% of the population will have experienced some form of mental illness. So there's no way you can escape this, whether it's yourself or your spouse or your best.
No way.
And
Your kids.
I agree with you 100%. It's largely we're in an awareness phase, which is good, because that's the first step to solving a problem, is admitting that there is one. But we still have a lot of work to do. And one quote I come back to when the topic comes up is, where there's great challenge, there's great opportunity. And that's where I want to shift to now. Is EllisDon has taken huge strides, and I would say you guys are an industry leader in facing these things head on. You've got dedicated teams, initiatives, employee support. What did this conversation look like when these plans started to develop in the office? Who was involved? What were the conversations around how to address these? Because I think one of the biggest issues is it's such a big and ubiquitous and ingrained issue. A lot of people don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. So what did that look like with EllisDon?
Well, it was a bit fortuitous. It started at the very beginning, frankly, with my sister Kathy, who is a therapist, not involved in EllisDon or in construction in any way. And I can't remember how the first conversation came about, but one of her partners in her practice, I was introduced to him, and we just set up an arrangement with him where we put his name and number out there. He said, if you need help, just call him. You don't go through us. You don't need approval. You don't need to fill out a form. We don't want to know. You can tell us if you like. But at the beginning, as you say, most people are kind of embarrassed and they don't want anybody else to know. So that's how we started. And we would check. We would say, well, how much business are you getting? I'm getting a lot of business. Okay. So it started really just because my sister said, this is maybe something you should think about doing. And once we started it, we realized it was more of an issue. I had a mentor. I was very fortunate, frankly, with my own mental health, my own leadership challenges and other challenges, to have a mentor, a guy named Mike Lavelle, who really, when I was going through a crisis of succession with my family, all that stuff, he was the father of a friend of mine. He was a teacher and a coach. And he said, you need help, my friend. So he helped me. But then what happened was we brought him into EllisDon. And we just made him available to a bunch of people, and he would just talk to them. And that's what we did for years. I think looking back now, it wasn't nearly enough, but it was something, I guess. And then it was really getting into COVID where we just became aware that our processes were being overwhelmed. Michael retired from EllisDon. And this is an important part I want to talk about for a minute, because if people are listening to this and what am I going to do, it's a challenge, because what we did then, and I have to say this carefully, but what we did then was we went out to some healthcare providers, to some of the big companies that provide these kinds of employee resources, employee benefits. And we found they weren't doing the job. We found that, we opened up the helplines. Our employees would call the same thing. It's all anonymous. Employees would call the helpline and they get a message and nobody would return their call.
Okay.
So we found, frankly, a failure on that side. And that's when we said, well, we have to hire the resources inside. I don't know if it costs more or less, and I don't think anybody ever asked the question, but now we've got a group headed up by this woman named Connie Ellis inside EllisDon full-time, who's fabulous. and who's very human and very encouraging, and who will be the resource, but also provides resources. And that's how we brought it to the next level. If you're running a company, even if it's a smaller company than EllisDon, you might say, well, listen, we can't afford to do this. Well, listen, you may not be able to afford not to do this. When you realize the positive impact that it will have on your company when your employees and your employees' families and your, and other and subcontractors on the site, because we've opened up those resources more broadly just to try and help. The impact is huge. It's immeasurable. It's really, really difficult. If you've improved somebody's mental health or happiness by 20%, how do you measure that? I have no freaking idea, but I can tell you that the impact is huge, and you'll see it.
Well, there's a positive impact and there's the reduction of the negative impact too, right?
That's
Like
right.
we spoke before about, if you're showing up and you're struggling with something at home, some people will say, old school construction culture, leave your feelings at the gate, hit the switch, turn it off, push
It's
it down, power
impossible.
through. It's impossible because we're humans. But that has been the culture that's been operating, I think, it's changing now, and it's being forced upon us by younger generations and COVID and all that. But that's been part of the challenge, right? The stigma, people not wanting to get.
But here's the problem, and I think construction leaders need to think about this and take accountability for it too. Not only do their employees bring their personal struggles to work, and so it affects their performance. Frankly, they take bad leadership and they take it home, and it affects their happiness and how good a dad they are and how good a husband they are. And then the whole thing becomes self-reinforcing. So you need to you need to try and make sure that the culture and the atmosphere at work is very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it turns out they need support on their personal journey, well, guess what? That's a very good thing. Help them there too.
Yeah. A couple other things kind of come to mind as we were talking there. Number one, you mentioned like EAP programs, right? Like Morneau,
Right.
Chappelle.
Employee assistance program.
They're great programs to have, but so reactive, and I don't know how effective they are. And to be honest with you, what I see with mental health and inclusion and all this stuff, I'm not saying this is EllisDon. A lot of companies, it's very performative, right? Oh yes, we care about our employees. We have an EAP program. Well, how many people are using it, and how effective is it? When you look at safety, right, physical safety on a site, you've got the safety pyramid, and there's different interventions at different points. The last line of defense is, PPE, and if you can't get around the hazard. So instead of focusing on reactive measures like EAP programs, what can we do upstream of that to make sure things don't get to that point of somebody thinking of, taking their own life or resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling?
Well, it's kind of funny you say that, because just before I came here, I had lunch with the head of the Canadian Mental Health Association, a terrific woman by the name of Camille Kenville. So I was obviously talking to her about this, and I was telling her that the woman at EllisDon who leads this, Connie Ellis, spends most of her time, the majority of her time, actually helping people, and less of her time letting them know about the resources, providing training. And I thought she would say it should be flipped. And she said, no, she's glad it isn't flipped, that the people already know the resources are there and are taking advantage of them. So I don't think, if it's okay for me to disagree with you just a little bit, that reactive is bad. As long as people know they've got a place to go, as long as they know the support is there and it's real and it matters and there will be follow through, then reactive is good. A lot of people don't know when they're going to have a struggle because they've been hiding it from themselves maybe, or for whatever reason, some event.
Mm-hmm.
But when they know it's there and they need it, to have it there is a great thing. And then I think the broader, more forward-looking support is more about letting people know, well, kind of maybe watch for these symptoms. Do you have these feelings? Do you may want to brush them off. Do not brush them off. If you're having them, come in and talk to us. That's maybe almost as preventive as you can get, because if you go too high level, then people don't listen. They say, that's not me.
Right.
I got no problems.
Yeah.
Dude, leave me alone. I'm a healthy guy.
I just want to go back to something you said, and then I got a couple other points here. Is, obviously there's a cost to doing this, right? EAPs cost money. If you have a full-time resource, it costs money. But what's the cost of not acting, right? Because the way things are going, it's been bad and it's getting worse. So at what point do we need to get to? This is not a direct question to you, but at what point how bad does it have to get before people actually smarten up and start acting on this stuff?
I don't know if it's a question of how bad does it have to get. I'm old enough to remember when construction was physically unsafe, or at least far unsafer than it is now. And we used to go out to our construction sites and say, you need to be safer. You need to spend money, invest in safety belts, all of this stuff, physical restraints, hard hats, boots, all the PPE. And people go, nah, it's too much money. It's within my lifetime. People go, that costs way too much money. And then finally people go, well, of course not. Of course it's way more expensive to be unsafe. In the human cost, like the human physical cost, on the site, on this, everything. I don't think we're quite there with mental health yet. But as we go further along and people start seeing, and even if you can't put a number beside the benefit, you can see that employee is back at work, that employee is happier, more productive. You know, if I can be so crass, that there's money in it, that money invested paid off in spades. But the fact that there's been an epidemic since COVID, as we said earlier, I think has helped bring it home. I think people are on the journey. I don't think it has to get much worse. I actually think we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
We're making progress.
That's good to hear. I know one thing I want to maybe ask you about, like we went over the stats, and suicide and substance misuse, it's exponentially higher in the construction industry. Why do you think that is? And I know I'll preface it by saying neither of us are mental health experts or psychologists.
Let's be clear.
I have my theories.
My clinical studies.
I
don't have any. I didn't do any.
I'm happy to share them. I wrote one down on a napkin once. But no, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I don't know. I think one thing that you can say is that construction remains to this day, especially in the field, a male-dominated industry. The male gender, everybody knows, it has been objectively measured. It's a fact that we are much less inclined to admit, to acknowledge our feelings, to share our feelings, to admit to weakness, to say, I'm having trouble, and to ask for help. So we don't do it. So what do? We bottle it up. So what happens when you bottle it up? Well, then you're more inclined to need a drink, I think. You're more inclined to need an outlet, to need a crutch, to need something. And that's all I can offer you is that it's all men. We're not good at this stuff. We're more inclined to substance abuse. And construction is a high risk, high anxiety, high pressure job with all sorts of deadlines and cost pressures. It's just a recipe for problems.
And you can't get around that stuff.
And it will never go away. The low price bid gets the job.
Yeah.
And so let's go. We got to go. We got a date to hit, and I don't have any money to build this building. So let's go.
Yeah. So I have a theory there. If you want to hear my theory.
I'm keen to hear it.
I'll start by using my analogy. I'm a mechanical guy. So I use the analogy of a steam system. Okay. So when everything's running fine, the boiler's running, it's producing steam, you have condensate traps and all this stuff, everything's going good. But as soon as something happens and there's maybe a slug of condensate that builds up or a valve gets closed, that's analogous to a stressor in life when something happens. Say you're going through a divorce or you just lost a parent or a child, whatever. On a steam system, there's a relief valve. There's a safety measure. When the pressure builds up, it goes safely outside of the building, doesn't hurt anybody. When you don't have that relief valve in place, there's catastrophic failure. So it's analogous to life in the sense that you need that relief valve. You need those outlets. Because if you don't do it a healthy way, because you can't tell me, oh, stuff it down, keep going, power through, be a man, which is typically what's expected in the past. I think it's changing now with gender norms and all that. But typically in the past, suck it up, power through, nobody cares. Leave your feelings at home, keep going. The pressure doesn't go away. It just goes in and it builds up and up and up. It's got to go somewhere. And I think a lot of times it comes down to coping mechanisms. You can have healthy coping mechanisms, running, journaling, meditation, whatever. Some people might laugh at that stuff. I do all of it, and I think it's very powerful working you. And then there's unhealthy coping mechanisms, substance misuse, all the stuff that can lead to, the worst case of suicidal ideation. So that's my analogy of a steam system. But here's my theory on the whole construction culture thing. I've dived into this a little bit. You talk about neurodivergence too. There's a high prevalence of neurodivergence in the trades, ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities. historically in the schooling system, students suffering from those didn't get the attention they needed, right? They were put in special classes. They were told they wouldn't amount to much. They couldn't take university courses or go to college, so they ended up just working with their hands. So they come out of the schooling system with that mentality. Okay. Then you put them on a construction site, which a lot of cases, unsafe, even with PPE and all that. There's still some shady stuff that goes on. Pressure to work unsafe, time deadlines, budget constraints, all this stuff. A lot of times they don't have a clean washroom to use or a table to eat their lunch at. When you put all this together, we can't wonder why there's these issues, right? Because people aren't, we're basically setting them up for failure. And what I think that type of person, they've developed their own internal value system based on being that person that does that dirty job that nobody else can or wants to do. And that's what they base their value around. I'll tell you why I think that, and then maybe you can counter to it. I do some social media posts, right? I put out a post that went viral. It got 2 million views. I'm not bragging because I got a lot of shitty comments out of it, to be honest with you. And it was about mental health in construction. I presented the suicide rate. I gave this theory that I proposed to you. Thousands of comments, overwhelmingly, were, this guy's a pussy. He sits down to pee. His wife has a boyfriend. And I'm like, I'm presenting things and I'm trying to shed some light on this and improve the industry. Why would it elicit that type of response? And I think it's because it questions that value in that person, right? Am I making any sense here, Geoff, or am I way off base?
No, I think you've got it 90%. Listen, I'm not going to argue with anything you said, except maybe I'll pick a couple of nits. I spent my life in construction. I spent my life with terrific people. I'm so glad I chose construction as a career. I don't think, and I actually think that most people in construction value what they do. They're proud of what they do. They know that what they do is important. That does not mean that they're not subject to these pressures, all the mental health pressures that we've talked about, or that they're any better than most of the other men, if I can make that generalization, about being afraid to admit it, about being called names like you were called. So that's why they hold it inside. But I do think they value what they do. I'd say that these people these toxic people that you encountered on social media, there seems to be a small group out there who are keen. They're anonymous, so they're cowards, but that will always be the case. But they have an outsized impact relative to their number because they're so aggressive in their comments. People think, well, I guess that's what's out there. No, that's not what's out there. That's 1% of what's out there. But it does scare people, not you or hopefully me, but it does scare a lot of people into saying, I don't want to admit to anything. I don't need that. I got enough grief in my life. I don't need those people all over me. Yeah. And so you don't come forward. But I do think people value what they're doing in construction.
There's a lot of pride. There's a lot of honor for sure. I think that's
it's a great career, and people do great things in construction. They build hospitals, they build schools, they build homes, they build the things that society needs in order to prosper, and they have every right to be proud of it. And I think that most of them are.
Mm-hmm. I think that's, to tie this back to culture, I always remind people I work with, same thing with Michael Guerin. I had this moment when we left, we got tower completion. So the hospital was occupying the new tower. So we were training the doctors and nurses. I remember leaving the trailer one day and I turned around and I had this moment. I'm Greek, by the way, so I get pretty philosophical sometimes. But I had this.
I'm Irish. I don't.
I had this moment. And I saw, an elderly person was going in this door there, and there was a woman pushing a baby stroller going in that door. And I said, holy shit, we built something that's going to impact this community. Yeah. You get so caught up in the shop drawings and the steel and the interferences and the BIM clashes and all this shit. But take a step back and think about this building, house, hospital, mall, whatever. It's going to be there well after we're gone. And it's going to serve thousands of people a year in this community. It's going to make a difference. Well, there's a lot of honor in that.
So my mentor, Mike Lavelle, said to me one day, do you celebrate at EllisDon all the great stuff you do? You build hospitals, you build schools, you build Michael Guerin Hospital. And as you said, it impacts so much of what's important to society. Do you celebrate that? And I said, no. And he said, well, why not? What's wrong with you people? Why wouldn't you be proud of, why wouldn't you celebrate how proud you are of what you do. And I said, I don't know. And he said, we'll start, for crying out loud. Would you just start? And I said, I'll try. And we never did. To this day, we don't really celebrate it.
You know why? Because there's always the next milestone. There's always the next job. There's always, it's tough. But we do need to celebrate those
We do
wins.
need to
Because
take a
it's
minute
tough-
and
it's a tough
celebrate
business.
it.
It's a tough business. You got to celebrate those.
And to recognize the pain and the struggle we go through to get to the end of Michael Guerin, which was a very, very difficult, challenging job. So both sides of that, the celebration and the recognition that this stuff wasn't easy.
So what I like these days is there's a lot of positive news and light being shone on the industry, right? A lot of government support, even social media people, stuff, micro, pushing people into the trades because it's a necessary part of where we're going. And there's this shortage, right? So let's talk a little bit about workforce development. So, on the talent shortage, which some people say doesn't exist, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that later. Just based on the numbers that I've seen, there's about 400,000 workers that are going to retire every year in North America from construction over the next 10 years, just based on age. Okay, so we're losing that. We talked about the mental health issues. 25,000 a year around there we lose to suicide and substance misuse. Projects are getting harder from what I've seen. They're not easy.
Bigger, tougher, more expensive, more complicated.
Schedules are shrinking. They need to be built faster. Budgets are maybe not so bad depending on the industry. But we're doing all this with a workforce that's stretched thin. They're fragile. Like you said, I think we're still feeling the remnants of COVID. People's nervous systems are still messed up. So when you look at this picture, like you've led a company through multiple industry cycles, what are your thoughts on where the industry needs to go or the changes that are happening with the workforce?
I don't think the industry has figured out how to deal with the upcoming mass retirement of all the baby boomers from the trades and from the industry in general, at a time when we are heading into what I'll just describe as build, baby, build, right? Defense, infrastructure, as well as the economy is starting to come back in terms of office buildings. Housing will come back. There won't be the people there to do it. We haven't figured that out. They're trying to get more people into trades, but that's years away from really being a solution to the problem. Automation is going to be pushed forward. Robotics, it just will, because otherwise the buildings won't get built. So robotics will find their way. Frankly, the only area where you and I might debate is that I think schedules were always impossible. And I think that the low bids were always tough. And I think the stresses of construction were maybe worse before, because before, and I'm going back decades now, there were no supports. If you were having mental health issues, well, get lost. Like it wasn't, now we got a long way to go. We've come some way. So the industry hasn't gotten tougher in terms of mental health. I don't know if it's gotten much better, but I do think that there's an upcoming crunch that we all know is coming. We can see the tidal wave off in the distance. We don't know what we're going to do when it lands, and it's going to be a big issue. Whether it's a mental health issue or not, the one good thing that will happen is that wages will go up. Your pay will go up. Now, you may have to move to the north to build defense facilities, which is tough on mental health. But there'll be money in this business for a long time to come, more than there has been in the past, because society is always needing to build. So that's one good thing. But there's a crunch coming, and we're not ready for it.
Especially, you probably saw, so Anthropic put out their workforce report recently.
Yeah.
And it showed which industries are going to be most impacted and least impacted. Construction, according to them, is one of the safest. In terms of the field labor side of things, I think a lot of the office tasks are going to be automated, and I don't want to get too far into AI, but there is, to your point, a huge amount of opportunity now and in the next 10, 20 years for building things.
I think let me just stop you there, because obviously I've got a view on that. I think you're right. I think Anthropic is right that the trades will be one of the last to be disrupted, especially if the disruption of white-collar jobs is coming as fast as they say it is. But if the construction industry really embraces AI, certainly on the process side, they can protect the jobs they've got. They can grow a lot. They may not add that many jobs, but the people they've got will not be displaced. And the trades will be protected for for a while yet.
Mhm.
So I think robotics is coming in the industry, and manufacturing, factory, prefab stuff is coming faster than people think. But I'm not going to argue with the futurists at Anthropic. They know more than I.
Mhm. Yeah, they've put a lot of money into it. So on the labor workforce and workforce development, there's a new generation coming in, right? And what I see and what people I've talked to online and people I work with, it's almost like there's this clash. Like there's this construction culture that's been operating a certain way for decades with the old school, loudest voice wins the argument and table banging and all this stuff. And then there's the people coming in who are maybe a little softer. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but they've just been taught to be more in touch with their feelings and more, I guess I go so far as to say respectful with other people. And when you look at the talent shortage, some people might look at it as a pipeline problem. I see it as a retention problem. There was a study done by the American Institute of Research a couple years ago, and they found that in construction, only 35% of apprentices were completing their apprenticeship. So 65%
Really?
of people were not completing. So to me, that points to the retention issue. Part of it is culture, part of it is the type of work. Maybe people just don't want to get their hands dirty. I don't know. But how do we, as leaders in the industry, meet the newer generation of workers coming in? Like, what do they need that our leaders right now are not giving them? Or what's set up in the system now that's not, causing a bit of friction?
I think you can have more faith in them. I think there's a tendency on the part of the baby boomers, frankly, to try and hold on to their status as long as possible. But in your company, whatever company that is, these younger people are smarter than we were. They're every bit as motivated as we were, but you've got to let them have the leadership roles, and you've got to let them have the leadership roles at a younger age than you're more comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And they will perform. They will be just fine. They'll be excited about it. They're dying to get rid of all us old people, and more power to them. But it is about retention. When I stepped down, I did this interview, and the newspapers said to me, "What's the difference between what you and Kieran are going to face in your careers?" I said, "I spent my entire career looking for work. Kieran's going to spend his entire career recruiting and retaining good people."
Mm-hmm.
So that's the fundamental difference. It will call for a different kind of leadership. And if you don't provide that kind of leadership, then your company will fail. Mm-hmm. Because the good people, the good young people, will go somewhere else. And you are going to have to talk to them and listen to them and not impose your values on them, but ask them what their values are, and at the very least, meet them halfway.
Mm-hmm. I think that's it. It doesn't have to be an absolute one or the other. I think we got to meet somewhere in the middle.
Sometimes younger people have a bit to learn. Sometimes there's a bit of maturing that needs to,
for sure.
Not with you and me, of course. We knew right from the beginning, but a lot of people, I had to grow up a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
But so meet each other halfway. Mm-hmm. But if you show them and you talk to them and you listen, it's like listening to your client, listen to your employees, especially the young ones. What can I do to help? What do you need? It won't kill you. You'll learn.
I think a lot of people too there's value in that, just giving them a voice. You don't necessarily have to implement exactly what they're saying or do things. Just answer their questions, be respectful, show them that they matter, right? I think that goes back to the basic needs of just being human.
We used to say, if you've got an entrepreneurial idea, at EllisDon, bring it forward. Now, we may not do it because maybe we thought of it and then if not, we'll explain to you why we're not doing it, and you'll have learned something. On the other hand, it may just be a great idea. Mm-hmm. And then we'll do it, and you get to be in charge of it. So you get both sides of that. The key is to encourage people to speak up, because if you don't actively encourage them to speak up, they won't. If you just put a thing saying, please speak up, they won't. You got to go to where they are, talk to them. I'm not saying I always did this, but I learned gradually to do that. And then they'll speak up, and then it comes back to that hierarchy of needs we talked about earlier. People go home and say, okay, what I do matters here. Mm-hmm. I'm part of something I want to be part of.
Right. And you're going to have a huge impact on their life. Like I've always
thought, it can only be a good thing.
We're not just here to build buildings. Like I want people to go home happy to their wife and kids at the end of the day, or husbands and what, I mean? It's, that's an important part.
Well, no, wait, it's not just going home. Well, going home physically healthy, mm-hmm. going home physically happy. But if you really take the time to build up those people and to focus on that, the buildings just happen. You'd be amazed at how fast these buildings go up, because everybody's dying to do a good job.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to show you what they can do. and the buildings fly up and you make money and the clients are happy. Isn't that amazing? It just happened.
So intrinsic motivation versus external.
Well, we may be finishing where we started. That's the way I did it because I didn't have any idea how to build anyway.
Yeah.
So then the buildings would go up and I'd say to myself, I don't know how that happened, but I'm sure glad I had those people.
Just a couple questions to close this out here because I think we're coming up on time. So, you spent 30 years as CEO of the biggest construction company in Canada. Now you're executive chair. What do you know now about people in leadership that you wish you knew in '96 when you took the role?
I kind of wish I knew that the fears that I had, that I thought I was alone in, and it does come back to mental health, but it just comes back to life. Everybody has those same fears. I was always afraid, well, do people approve of me? What do they think of me? Well, guess what? The person sitting right beside you has those exact same fears.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to think you're alone in this world with your fears. You're not. Other people have exactly the same fears. And then all you have to do is start a conversation with them. If I'd have known that 35, 40 years ago, I would have done better. Let's just say that. And then secondly, I wish I'd have known just how easy it is to sit down with somebody, a client or an employee, or frankly, my spouse, and say, what do you need from me?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll go, I'll tell you what I need from you. I need these 3 things. Well, then do those 3 things. And then your life is so much happier and their life is happier and everything gets so simple. Just ask them and they'll tell you.
I think a lot of us are just wired to put ourselves first. And I'll use the example with a spouse, right? Because there's been times where my wife came to me and she was going through something. And I offer up a solution and I want to jump in and fight the fire.
She's not interested in that.
She's not interested. And then I was like, okay, so maybe she wants options. So the next time I said, okay, yeah. And she was like, no, you just don't get it. Like you just ask. Some people just want to be heard.
Yeah, here's what she's saying. You're not listening. Would you just shut up and listen?
So here's our thing now. And a little trick is and it's the same, she does the same with me. When we start venting about something that happened, it's like, okay, do you want support or do you want action or what are you looking for here? Exactly what you said. Ask questions. That's part of support. And it doesn't apply just to your spouse, it's anybody. So, okay. So last question here. If you could say one thing directly to senior leaders listening to this, maybe CEOs, VPs, directors who are facing these challenges right now, mental health, workforce challenges, all this stuff, what would it be? Not something they want to hear. I know you're a straight shooter. Something they really need to hear.
I would say make sure that your people in your company have all the tools, and you and I have been specifically talking about mental health tools. So I'm talking about emotional support. I'm obviously also talking about the training and the equipment, but make sure that they have the emotional and physical and intellectual support that they need to be successful. That's part 1. Part 2, get out of the way. Great leaders, in my view, I'm not saying I am one, but I'm convinced great leaders build great leaders. And that means get out of the way. And you'll know you're really a great leader, in my humble view, when the people that you are leading are getting out of the way of the people that they are leading, who are getting out of the way of the people that they are leading. Then your company is going to go through the roof. Give them what they need, get out of the way. And most important, that requires emotional and intellectual support more than the kind of stuff that comes to your mind when you're thinking about the tools that they require.
Amazing. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, Geoff. Really appreciate it. If there's any leaders out there listening right now or watching and you share these thoughts or you want to share your story, please reach out. Angelo@hsoc.one. Love to hear your story. And ultimately, we're just trying to make the industry a better place. So thanks a lot, Geoff. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
So good. So good. Appreciate it.
I hope that was a bit helpful. Thanks very much for listening.